Welcome to episode 17 of Sell Smarter, Sell Faster. I'm Dani Buckley, your host, and I'm joined by Shay Smith, our producer. Hey, Shay, how's it going?
It's good. It's good. Pretty day. Can't complain. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's actually kind of cloudy here in Northern California, but we're dealing with it. So just a reminder, everybody, who we are. We're Lead G2 by the Center for Sales Strategy. We're a sales performance agency. We specialize in helping businesses sell smarter and faster. And we do that by using inbound marketing and sales enablement strategies. And what is Sell Smarter, Sell Faster? This podcast, it's a weekly podcast focused on sales growth. You can expect fresh insights, strategies, real world examples, all kind of aimed at helping business leaders like you take your sales enablement to the next level. So that's who we are.
Yeah. And if you haven't noticed this season, we are streaming on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. So if you like what you're hearing and you want weekly insights on sales growth from experts in the field, please go ahead and subscribe at your preferred podcast platform or on YouTube. We're on all the things. So visit us there, connect with us. You can also connect with us at our URL at sellsmartersellfaster.com. And if you ever have any questions around something you've heard in one of these conversations, or you want to connect with Dani or myself or one of our guests, you can find all of that connect info in the notes for the show as well. So I'm really excited. Today we are talking about sales enablement. Dani, I know you love sales enablement. I love sales enablement. I am a huge fan of everything learning and growing in this area. So can you tell us a little more? Take it over. Let's hear some about sales enablement before I bring in our guest to the studio.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to just do a level set. I think we talked about this in season 1, but at Lead G2, we've got kind of 4 buckets that we use to describe sales enablement, like kind of everything it encompasses. So I want to just touch on those first before we bring Charlie in. So the first bucket of sales enablement is strategy. That's really making sure you have that strategy, that plan in place. This often is maybe a sales playbook, sales plays, as well as a defined sales process. All these things are kind of foundational, but that you also have that strategy for the other buckets that I'm about to touch on. So the second bucket is content, having that content strategy. In that way, you can make sure that your salespeople have the right content and resources and everything at their fingertips to really address questions, objections, to deliver value, to be educational, and really just generally to be helpful throughout the entire sales process. This is so important and such a big part of sales enablement. Number 3 is technology. While we believe you don't necessarily have to have technology in order to do sales enablement, it's highly recommended. We live in a world where we've got a lot of different tools, a lot of different software that's going to allow us to be smarter, to work faster. And this includes your CRM and making sure you have the right CRM, but there's lots of other tools that complement a CRM too. And then the last bucket, number 4, training, sometimes gets overlooked. People will kind of roll out all this sales enablement stuff, be really excited, put all this money and time into it, and then do a training and then kind of like move on, right? We recommend ongoing, consistent training that's continuing to enroll and also really utilize your salespeople's expertise and feedback so that your sales enablement strategy, resources, all of that is consistently kind of being optimized. And that's what we see the most successful businesses do. So strategy, content, technology, and training. Those are the 4 buckets we use to describe sales enablement. So now that we're all kind of on that same page, I think we're ready to jump into the interview.
Yeah. And I did want to note that we have all of those 4 buckets at sellsmartersellfaster.com. So if someone wanted to dig in a little more, they could go there and check those out and learn more on those. So I am going to introduce our guest. I'm excited to have him here today. Charlie Riley with Havoc Shield. Charlie delivers over 20 years of marketing, sales, and growth experience leading marketing teams as the first marketing lead hired 5 times. Named a top 50 B2B Marketing Influencer to follow by Top Rank Marketing and a former edtech CMO, he knows what it takes to create a marketing function from scratch, align marketing and growth strategy with other departments within an organization. So with that, I am going to bring him into the studio here and I'm going to jump backstage and y'all have a great chat.
Thanks, Shay. Hey, Charlie, how's it going?
I'm great. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you here. And I know your bio kind of touched on it, but the first question I always like to hear just like from your words are, just a little bit about your background. What kind of makes you a pro on sales? And I don't know if you would call yourself that, but I certainly would call you a pro on sales enablement. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that calling yourself something like that, we're all always learning. You always should be learning. I know in sales it's always be closing, but I think the motto really should be always be learning. And I like what you guys do with the training and learning side of things, which is a big part of enabling sales. So I think what the experience I bring is I've sat on both sides of the table, and I think that the cohesion between marketing and sales has to be there. I mean, everyone talks about it, it's ad nauseum, but if they're not on the same page and working together, if sales can't sell anything, and with the support of other parts of the organization, nobody has a job. And so I've come at it from the marketing side, and more recently over the last few years from a sales leadership side, and actually, the building partnerships and direct sales. So I think where I come from is understanding that there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and you have to basically, if you can make a salesperson's job easier, everyone's going to win. And so I've always taken that mentality of working across departments, really trying to understand the internal education. I think that's sometimes it's more important than external communication, and kind of seeing below the iceberg. There's a lot that you see at the surface level, but I think from the sales and the marketing side, to understand both where the other side is coming from, that's just going to help everybody win. So I wouldn't call myself a pro yet, but because we're always getting better. But I think I've been able to do that at multiple organizations.
Yeah, I love that. I really agree. It's like the integration, the alignment is so important. You see organizations do sales enablement okay, and usually the missing link is that they don't have that kind of alignment across things to really make it better. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So I kind of started this episode off sharing a little bit about kind of like how we define sales enablement, but there's a lot of different ways people talk about it. And I'm just kind of curious, in your own words, how do you define it? What do you think are kind of like the key pieces that make sales enablement what it is?
I think you touched on a lot of them, and what you and your organization bring, I think hit on all those well. So kudos to you guys for that. But I think it's, like I said, to boil it down, it's making a salesperson's job easier. And that comes from, do you have the right technology to automate things? And there's an argument there too of there's a fine balance of personalization and automation. And so I think that understanding that balance is important. It's making sure that the story's right. Marketing and sales should not be talking at someone. It should be talking with somebody. And that's telling stories. And so, at the surface levels, that's easy to say, but do you have all the right resources? And one thing that I've learned in my career is that everyone has a different learning style. And so when you are creating content, when you're thinking about your strategy, you have to think about it from the way that the person that you're intending to talk to takes that information in. Some people are very visual learners. They want to see something. They want to see a short video. Some want to see larger documentation. So I think that the whole idea is, how do you make a salesperson's job easier? How do you allow them the most time in front of potential prospects to solve a problem for them? And that's removing barriers. That's making the job easier. That's organizing things so that they could find it easier. So all that rolls up to helping a salesperson's job just be easier and have those conversations and take away the friction that can be there, that can help them or not allow them to do the right steps.
Yes, I love that. Like it's I feel like we all want to like really define, and I love having our 4 buckets, right? It's nice. We want to define, like, make things nice and pretty, but it's really anything that's helping salespeople, like you said, reduce friction, do their job quicker, better. I love what you first said too, that balance of automation and personalization. That's so important because often we can skew one way too much either side. And so really having that balance is key. I love that. You also touched on learning style, which is good. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just to add to the personalization side of it. One of my favorite sales leaders, Sam McKenna, talks about "show me you know me," and she's kind of coined that phrase. But it's really important because you're selling at scale. Unless it's a very niche and maybe small product, your TAM is very small. You're gonna have, like, the numbers can be big sometimes. And so there's a trade-off there. How much time can you spend to personalize something versus bringing templates in and utilizing maybe something that's a best practice that's already been built. But there's ways to bring both of that in. So you can have templates, in HubSpot, we build a lot of templates. We build a lot of, so that you can build some sequences, but there's ways to insert some personalization there. There's things that you can see in the background of someone's video as you're on a call with them. There's things that you can reference on LinkedIn. I just posted about that today. It's March Madness today. There's a lot of teams playing basketball. There's a lot of alumni out there. There's a great opportunity to reach out to somebody with a personalized message that they might care about, as opposed to just sending them, a cold email out of the blue. So I think there's a fine balance there. And that's one of those things that you can grow over time and find some nuance in of what's the trade-off of the amount of time you're putting into that versus getting the quantity. There's a quantity and quality exponent there that you have to make sure you hit a nice balance with.
Yeah, I love that. It really is kind of figuring out what that equation is, and it can be different, right? For a lot of different reasons. So it's great. So our listeners love, kind of real world examples. And so I'm curious if you have anything that you can share that you've seen, that you've done inside an organization that has really directly impacted results and revenue. Like, kind of, what did you do? How did it work? This could be one or two examples, whatever you got.
Yeah, I think touching on your buckets, some of that is content and really digging into, and this is where a marketing angle comes in, but also a sales angle. I've always pushed the marketing team to sit on sales calls or support calls, because they're going to hear how a customer actually talks, because marketing could use all the data, all the research to say, well, this is what they read and this is what they might search for. But if you're on a call and you actually hear, and this goes into the training side of it, but if you actually hear how they talk, if you hear about the pain points that they're bringing up, they might not align with what you think their friction is versus what that actually is. And so that can really help drive a strong content strategy. And I've seen that by spending time with sales, by leading sales. Now it's you're digging into more of what the customer is talking about. And there's a lot of tools that can help you dig into and analyze sales calls and what they're saying. And so I think it's paying more attention to what your perception or hypothesis is of a problem versus actually what that is, because sometimes they may not align. And so I've seen a lot of success with being able to, and being iterative. So just because you create a campaign or you're creating, I don't like the term sell sheets, because who likes to be sold to? I think you're bringing resources like that, but you should be iterative with those, and you shouldn't, well, we've already created that, that's what we're going to use. You should be flexible with that. And so I think having some ability to be flexible and know that your work is never done, I think that's been a strategy that I've seen successful on the content development side.
Yeah, love that. I agree on the iterative, like, just it's and it's such a big piece that I think gets looked over or passed over, is continually getting that feedback from sales. Is this helping? Is this being valued? Is this actually, so often I see it where, create this content or resources and then salespeople never use it because they don't actually see the value in it. Marketing thought it was a great idea, this beautiful infographic or whatever, right? But it's like, nobody cares. Really looking at that seems important.
Yeah, that's where I think ego on both sides has to be checked a little bit. Like you said, that's a great example. I've been guilty of this, I think, before. As a marketer, you're like, oh, this would be great. Someone's going to love this. And the reality is, someone asks for, hey, send me some information. They're probably not going to read it. It's like, after the fact. So you got to dig in a little bit deeper on those questions. Like, what are you really looking for? How can I maybe tailor what you would like me to send to you? I'm interpreting one way. Let's find it another way. But I think it's, like I said, ego on both sides. Marketing needs to realize, just because you spend a lot of time creating something doesn't mean it's of value to that customer. And on the sales side, it's the same way. They need to help educate on the marketing side. They need to help them understand this wasn't a hit, but here's why. It can't just be that didn't work. Go into the context of why it didn't work. What's the feedback you specifically heard back from? Where are the drop-off points? Because it's not helpful for anyone just to lay blame on the other side of the house there. It's more of helping them understand how to get better for the next time.
Yep. Love it. So we talked about content. I'm curious if you have any examples or just like features of technology that you particularly find really valuable to share with those listening.
Yeah, I think what can be useful sometimes is there's so many ways to look at analytics. There's you can look at site traffic, you could look at search traffic. I think that those can be helpful. I think there needs to be a fine balance there of, again, you can't, a lot of times I think I've seen this, or I've experienced this, where as a marketer, you're looking at, you're only paying attention to those analytics. Google, you're looking at Google Analytics and seeing, well, what pages did people visit and why? But again, if you're not aligning that with what that customer is actually saying, if you're not talking to customers, part of that is product marketing. You're talking to customers, you're doing the case studies, you're understanding what the actual friction was. You could be in a little bit of a silo there. So I think analytics are a tool, but they shouldn't be the end all be all. And I think back to that point of finding that balance of personalization versus automation, you could spend all day just talking to one customer. Is that effective? Probably not. So how do you make that a simpler process? And this goes into building process too. How do you make it simpler for a customer to give you feedback? Are you doing NPS on a frequent basis? Because that's a much easier access point to just click one number and that's it, versus asking someone to spend an hour with you to do a case study. Is that their main intention? Probably not. And it's going to be hard to draw that from them. So I think you have to pull it out of customers in the right way, but make it valuable for them as well. One way that I've seen that before a couple times is building a customer advocacy group. And so you find either core customers that are just going to be your advocates and speak on your behalf, or you find those fringe customers who maybe they might go to a competitor. But if you bring them into the fold, you ask them a lot of questions, you listen to them. And this is both sales and marketing. They have to sit there and both sides have to listen to this, because you're going to pick up different things. You're going to turn that somebody who's maybe a passive from the NPS side of things, you're going to turn them into possibly a passive to a promoter. And so that's been a good way, I think, to build content out of that, because you can get great case studies. You basically have a focus group that's at your disposal, and you can pull great pieces of content that could be turned into a video, turned into a case study, a white paper. So there's a lot of executions that can come out of listening to customers like that.
I love that. That's such a good takeaway for, I think, folks is remembering that piece, like not coming up with it all on your own, actually hearing it from, what is it, the horse's mouth. I love that. And you're kind of helping segue perfectly into my next question, which is around the creation of content. So that was one example of how to get content ideas, right? By talking to your customers or your prospects. So I'd love to kind of dive into how at your organization, how you guys create content, because that's like kind of one of the heaviest lifts of both inbound marketing and sales enablement, right? Creating content. We have all these great ideas. We have all these dreams of what we want. And then when it's actually like, okay, go create that ebook or that sell sheet or webinar or whatever. So, a lot of organizations outsource a company like us, right, to do it. But not everyone does that or can do that or wants to do that. So tell us about your process. How do you create content? Who does it? Kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're right. It is a heavy lift. And I think it's a simple, again, I love the iceberg model because it's relatable to every function in industry, but you see this much up at the top. So someone sees an email or they see an ebook and think, oh, that it might have taken 10 minutes to create, or that isn't that, they don't know the context that goes behind that. So I think that's always important to think about. What's your capacity? What's the end goal? Is it to create content just to put it up somewhere? Because that's not really a strategy. That's just a tactic that's going to get you nowhere. So I think it's really stepping back in a couple ways. It's first starting out with what's the real goal here? And it really should be to drive sales. But that's where sometimes there's a disconnect of, selling at somebody versus just educating. And there's a lot of argument right now. Do you gate things? Do you not gate things? I think there's, there's a balance there too of how much are you hoarding and like dangling out in front of a prospect to give you all their information when they're apprehensive of that, because 95% of people that are looking for information are not in a buying mode right now. So you have to think about the long game there. But we start with from a content strategy of asking, so what? And I think that's a very important question to ask is, so what? Is somebody going to really care about this? And is it self-serving for us to tell our story, to talk about the feature set or the technical specs? Because more than likely they don't care about that. They care about, what's this going to do for me? How much is this going to cost me? How much of a pain is this for me to switch from something else if they're using another resource? So I always like to think from that standpoint. I try to put myself in that buyer's mode as best I can. Again, a lot of that can come from customer service or sales, but to really understand, so what, and what format do they need that in? Because like I talked about before, everyone has a different learning style. So can you take one core piece of content? So if you figure out what that so what is, or that main pain point that someone has, you can start with something small and then iterate out of that a couple different ways to use that. So how can I turn that into a video? If that is somewhat of a case study, because those are really good, they can be compelling stories. Let's say we're starting with a case study. How do I turn that into a video? Is this somebody that would commit to maybe 15 minutes of me interviewing them to talk about, the true impact of that, what that was on their company? How can I turn that into smaller social posts that I can share a couple different times? Who can talk to that as a thought leader, and maybe where can we take that then and position that to get a speaking engagement, because there should be executions that go beyond that. So we try to start with telling compelling stories about what we've already done for customers. That's a really great point, because it involves them. They're going to help promote it for you as well. So I think that there's a natural extension there. So I like to start there, but we really look at what are the trends going on in the industry? What are the trends happening with our customers and the things that they're asking? So there's some social proof you can find online. There's a lot of stuff you can find from Google Trends and such, but I've just found talking to customers is the easiest place. It's just, you can start with stories there, and then they can just expand upon that. And so we do a mix too of, like you talked about it. It's a hard thing sometimes to find internal thought leaders who maybe don't think that that's their job. And so what I've found to be able to get around that, it's very intimidating to look at a blank sheet of paper or a blank Google Doc and say, marketing asked me to write about a certain topic. Well, that's intimidating for most people. What I found from a marketing team standpoint is, if you start that, even if you're not the subject matter expert, but you get it 50%, 60% of the way there, present that to the thought leader and say, I took a first stab at it. What do you think? Can you help adjust this? You get it much further down the path there. So I found that as a good internal execution. And then externally, we do work with content teams that can help supplement some of that thought leadership we have internally.
Great. Love it. And is there someone, and maybe it's you, I don't know, but who oversees all that? Like, who's kind of in charge of sales enablement content creation?
I am at our organization. So we're a small startup. So it's, you're wearing a lot of hats. And so that's a pro and a con. You can bounce back and forth with having really good access to the sales side of things and the customers and understanding what their needs are. But that's where, there's a fine balance of saying there's only a finite amount of time we have. So we do need external resources that can help us with that. And if they're good in your industry, if they know what they're doing, if they can write for search and for SEO, that's a great resource to have. And there's a good trade-off there.
Great. Thanks for, that's a lot of good info. So we've covered a lot. And kind of to close us out, what I always like to do is just see what did we miss that you want to be sure to part onto our listeners? Any kind of just like tips or even trends that you're seeing, just like anything that you think would be really useful, especially for those business and sales leaders out there listening, that they should be maybe keeping an eye on or thinking about when building their sales enablement strategy?
Yeah, I talked about some of these things before. I think being iterative is important. I think it's not something where you create something and put it on the shelf and that's it. We're only going to use it that way. It's just like any sort of campaign. You should always try to better that. And so I think that's important to be aware of. I think it's important to continue with training. No one is ever done learning, especially in most industries and in most roles. I continue to try to push myself personally and professionally from a training standpoint. And there's a plethora of really good resources out there. So I think both from an individual standpoint, like you need to be as a growing leader, or it can come top down, but the ones that are really good are the ones that seek that out themselves. And so I think that's very important from a standpoint of, there's so much going on. There's so many things you can learn about. Training is probably one of those areas that maybe gets looked past, because it's not an immediate instant return sometimes. So that can be hard to quantify, but I can't say enough about, finding the right training, finding the right resources that you trust to find some data and some insight from, and really rely on that. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we seem to agree on a lot of things, which is I love it. And I love hearing things in your words and from your experience. I know Shay, for those watching on video, just dropped some of your information to connect with you. This has been so insightful. I really appreciate your time, Charlie. Hope you enjoyed yourself here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think happy to connect with anyone, and I'm always learning too, so I'm happy to learn from others. But there's no, the nice part now is there's so much technology out there. There's so much content. There's so many things you could do. There's a lot of noise, so there's easy ways to break through it. But happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll talk soon. Have a good one, Charlie. And Shay, you are muted.
I am muted. As the producer, I always extra mute myself when I go backstage to make sure. So sorry about that. But I was saying thank you, Charlie, for joining us. That was very insightful. I love hearing, how other people are doing sales enablement, how they're executing that strategy, and where they come up with content ideas. I think his point on, getting with that core group of customers and learning from them and hearing their experience is so valuable. I know that's important to us and a lot of people out there doing really good sales enablement. So with that, I do have a few reminders. If you want to learn more about sales enablement, if we can help you with that, if you want to look at those 4 buckets that Dani talks about at the beginning, you can visit sellsmartersellfaster.com. We've got a lot of resources there specifically on the topic of sales enablement. We've also got some blogs related to this topic and some past episodes. So if you want to check those out, you can visit us there. Make sure you are subscribed on your preferred podcast platform or on YouTube. So we will have a lot of great episodes coming out this season, and we are already planning our next season with some great guest lineup there. So make sure you're subscribed. We want to connect with you. We want to be a part of this Selling Smarter and Selling Faster family to make sure that we're helping you learn and grow in those areas. And if you'd like to connect with Dani, I do want to put her information. If you're watching on video, it's on the screen. If you are listening on your podcast, you can find these links in the show information. And I'm going to throw mine on here too. If anyone wants to connect with me, I love to talk all things marketing, inbound marketing, and sales enablement. So with that, Dani, any last reminders before we close out this episode?
No, just thank you for joining us for episode 17. We'll be back next week with Natalie Furness talking about RevOps, which is a really hot topic, and I'm excited to dive into that. Like Shay said, make sure you're subscribed, and we will see you on the next episode. Happy selling, everybody.